We're live.
Mm-hmm. We're live.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Onward Transitions Family Forum for November 23rd, 2021. I'm joined by our clinical team here tonight, so we can all join in the conversation. To my right is Kate Forcier, who's one of our therapists and is also involved in our admissions department. And to my left is Jackie Roberge, who is one of our clinicians who's been here, 3 years now?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Who is also our liaison with community providers, and she is also the technical wizard behind all of this.
So hopefully everything's working right now.
Yes. And thank you all for your patience. We rescheduled this from last Thursday. We had our Pinesgiving celebration in this same room last Thursday afternoon, and it was really quite special. We spent a couple of hours sitting around a big long table with all of the members, all of your adult children, just engaged in casual, fun conversation and good food. And we didn't want to rush the process, and it was really enjoyable for all of us. So our topic tonight is transactional analysis, which looks at the transactions between people, the interactions. And we thought this was particularly timely as many of your adult children are coming home for the holidays. And probably most of them are already home for the holidays. And we spent a fair amount of time here working with our members in preparation for this and talking about some of these concepts and really helping them prepare to come home for some of them it's been a number of months since they've seen all of you. So we do this every year around the holidays because it's not uncommon at all for us to see some regression in the interactions. So we wanted to try and prepare everybody for this and do whatever we can to help this be a really positive experience for the entire family. I don't know, any thoughts on that before we jump into some of this, guys?
Happy Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
We're excited for y'all to be together.
Yes.
Truly. Okay, so let's start with this term ego state. An ego state is a pattern of consistent behaviors, thoughts, and emotions that we engage in. And for the purposes of transactional analysis, which was created by a gentleman named Eric Byrne some years ago, he looks at three particular ego states. The parent ego state, the adult ego state, and the child ego state. Okay? So I'm not going to go into great depth on this, but just quickly. So the parent ego state is... We develop this unconsciously through our own experiences with our own parents, the way that we were parented, and much of it is unconscious. And so a lot of it is repetition from what we experienced. And this ego state, this parent ego state, isn't just when we're interacting with our kids. It has to do with how we interact with everyone we see, and depending on what ego state we're in. So two subcategories of the parent ego state is nurturing parent ego state, which is kind and empathetic and, all the things that you would think. Thoughtful, yes. And the other is more of a controlling critical, kind of a roughly equivalent to what might be considered a harsh superego. Mm-hmm. So pretty critical.
Follow the rules.
Yes. Yeah, follow the rules. And so we all slip into these different states continuously. I saw a meme, and I thought this applied somewhat. Sometimes I open my mouth and my father comes out, or my mother comes out. And that would be an example of slipping back really almost unconsciously into that parent ego state. And when I do that, my kids roll their eyes at me, so I kind of know that I'm there.
Sometimes we roll our eyes.
Well,
Yeah.
Yes. Yes, my version of mansplaining is like dad-splaining. So yeah, my kids roll my eyes. These guys roll their eyes at me, and it's like the okay boomer look. I know I've slipped into it. Let me go to the child ego state, which there's two subcategories of that: the free child and the adapted child. So the free child state is where we are when we experience a sense of adventure and spontaneity and creativity and excitability and joy. So this is a really important state to be able to experience. It's not like we're saying it's time to grow up. It's we need to recognize and understand these states when we're in them. So, you know, a 5-year-old might experience this, you know, making mud pies. A 50-year-old might experience that by being on a golf course or being on a ski mountain and just experiencing the joy of being there. A 20-something might experience that by just laughing hysterically with a friend looking at, you know, TikTok or something. So, you know, as much as it can drive us a little crazy sometimes, that's them being in that really healthy state. Any more either of you would say about that?
Jackie and I might experience that in the shoe department of Nordstrom Rack.
Yes, exactly.
Utter joy.
Little impulsive.
And
Does fall in that
excited.
category, yes.
Yeah, and then, so the other child ego state is what's called the adapted state. And so on one hand, that can be a child who's learned to follow the rules and be compliant and agreeable and, you know, generally has learned to navigate. You know, it can be in the extreme where they're over-dependent, but it's also a productive way to be at times. The other side of that is the rebellious adapted child, you know, who pushes back on things, who challenges authority, who just goes against the grain and doesn't want to follow the rules. And they're not necessarily being defiant for defiance sake as much as, you know, they take issue with some things and they let you know about it. And if you're in your harsh, you know, criticizing parent ego state and they're in their rebellious adapted child state, you can see how that might lead to some problems. So
A little bit of complex dynamics.
Yes. So the third ego state is the adult ego state, and you know this is more of us being mindfully in the present. You know, so our interactions are not based on past history, past patterns, as much as this is the situation as it is right now, and this is kind of on a rational level how I think we can best address this.
Yes, and I think it's important to note that you can be in one ego state one moment and another one in another, right? Like we can kind of switch through these very quickly, and that there's no judgment of any of these, right? This is just a way to kind of label these different states. Some of the words are a little harsh, but there is no judgment based on what ego state you're in, and sometimes you need to be in one versus the other based on how your adult child is showing up.
Or the circumstance that you're in.
Right, absolutely.
Right. So maybe let's talk a little bit about some of the work that we've been doing, you know, in groups and individually with members, with your adult kids, to help them understand this and prepare them for, again, a visit home that they maybe have not had in quite a while.
Yeah, so for me, I run the Monday to Tuesday group. So in Monday group, which is really acceptance and commitment therapy based, we do an ACT matrix every week, which ends up with them creating some committed actions for what they would like to focus on. So last week when we did this, I just had them do their normal matrix, and then I said, well, thinking about visiting home, right? Do your committed actions change at all? Do your values shift? So just had them be really thoughtful about the fact that they would be around family, and does that shift values? And then on Tuesday in Healthy Relationships, I did a psychoed on transactional analysis. So I taught them all about the theory, the different states, you know, the ways that that can show up in life. And then the most important thing that I felt like we did was I had them set intentions at the end of that group. So each member that was there had a list of intentions on how they would like to show up as an adult while they're at home. So to really kind of intentionally practice showing up in that ego state.
And then I think for Skills Group on Fridays, which is the group that I run, we kind of are always working on and practicing ways to stay in and stay present in the adult ego state. So whether it's working on developing systems for organization or taking trips out into the community for things such as obtaining a Maine ID card, trips to the laundromat to go through the motions of how to plan accordingly for the right amount of coins or the right amount of laundry detergent. How are you going to get there? How are you going to carry your laundry? Communication skills, how to effectively communicate with different members of your community, whether it's family members, friends, romantic partners, setting boundaries and talking about the things that you need in those moments. All of those things are common topics that we're regularly covering in Skills Group to help our members really just kind of figure out how they can consistently live in that adult ego state. Yeah.
And I think also apartment consults, right?
Yeah.
And in their planning
Lots of the coaching.
until leaving last week or this week, right? They relied on us to kind of get that support for most of it. So we're kind of allowing ourselves to help kind of balance that adult to adult dynamic versus them leaning on y'all to be like, I need to pack or, catch my flight on time and all of those little pieces.
Order my Uber to the airport.
Yes,
all that kind of
absolutely.
stuff.
Yep.
Yeah. So, one of the strategies that we use, and this is one we recommend to you, is to really communicate up front. Okay, what do you need to do in order to get yourself to the airport on time, to catch the flight, to get home in time? And so really breaking it down with them, identifying the tasks, not creating any sort of expectation that we're going to do it for them, but that we're going to help them identify what they need to do in order to accomplish the task.
Yeah.
Right.
And we do a lot of that.
Yes.
And sometimes when we're thinking about the task list, it can simply be removing some things that aren't necessary from the task list in order to successfully get on to those next steps and dismount appropriately, moving on to the next thing.
Yeah. And generally speaking, I think we really try, whether we're actively thinking this way or not, to maintain an adult ego state with the members, with your adult kids. We don't want to slip into that parent ego state, which then increases the likelihood that they're going to slip into a child ego state. We want to maintain that we're in the present moment and interacting with respect with one another.
Yeah.
Tonight at dinner, I think, was a good example of that.
Yeah, so tonight at dinner, one of our members was going to be joining a whole group of staff, and so I felt like there was a great opportunity for some flexibility and some choosing what we ate. We didn't really have a plan because it's a funny week here with remote programming and the holiday in the middle, so we had some things in the fridge and we could be creative. And the one member that was going to be joining us, I just said, what are you interested in? What would you like to eat? And that conversation turned into them participating in making the meal with me. So I took one task and they took another task, and the two of us came together side by side to create the meal that was ultimately shared with the rest of the staff. And it was fantastic. And it wasn't me providing direction or steps or monitoring. It was just trust and an understanding that that piece of the dinner was going to be prepared, and it was prepared wonderfully, and that I was able to focus on my thing, and then just had that mutual sense of pride and accomplishment when we were able to serve it to Jackie and Andy and a couple of other folks that were here this evening. So I think that's the example maybe that you're speaking to.
Yep. And then in my emotional intelligence group this past week, I was emphasizing empathy and being able to read the room and being able to read your parents. What's important to them in terms of the interactions while you're home. What's going to matter to them? Can you read that? And I was giving an example, and I was imitating a parent basically, and saying, I'm tired of feeling like I'm always walking on eggshells. Just giving them an example of how would you handle that if a parent said that, and a couple of members responded, probably I ought to listen to what they're saying about this, but a couple of others really had a very strong reaction to this, and not positive. And it reminded me that old phrases that we use, tones of voice, just old behaviors, mannerisms, can really set off this dynamic, which really can lead to some regression back. And and we spent time talking it through, and everything was fine. But the feedback that I got from the members that reacted was, I have heard that phrase a million times, and I can't stand hearing it anymore. So I think it's really important to pay attention to that, not necessarily that phrase specifically, but if there are those old patterns that have existed in the family, to really be thoughtful in that adult ego state and be present in the moment and not just sort of easily slip back into some of those old ways of interacting.
Yeah. An example of that for me and my family is, my father, both my parents were very good cooks, and there was a lot of time where we were asked to participate and help prepare a meal. And then there were high expectations that would come across during that process. And so I have a little bit of my own tendency to, if I'm asked to this day to help with a thing, my question kind of going off in my head is, are they going to judge how I cut the carrots? Are they going to be okay with how small I slice things? And I have to sometimes catch myself and say, no, nobody said anything yet. It's okay. Just go through your steps and don't already kind of deviate the feeling and how I'm presenting myself and what's going on in the kitchen before anything even happens. So that's a little bit of an example of trying not to let old patterns become a problem in the present.
Right, and being mindful of like what's actually happening in front of me.
Right, and responding.
What's the story I'm telling myself about what has happened or what could happen.
Yeah.
So that's, I think, maybe shifting to how y'all can, be prepared for this when members are at home. Is just be prepared. Some of them are probably going to come home ready to have some of these conversations around expectations and time expectations, boundaries. How they might want to take space if they're feeling overwhelmed. And if they don't initiate those conversations, they're great conversations for y'all to initiate. To just really have that upfront conversation about like what would we all like for this to look like, right? And if there's compromises that need to be made, you can discuss that ahead of time versus in the moment when, on holidays we're all a little stressed out. Things can get heightened and then we can shift into those old patterns.
Yeah. And, our members, your adult children, are both excited to come home and spend time with the family, and some of them are anxious about any number of different things. Most all of them are aware that, you use the term judgment, not necessarily that they're being judged, but that parents are assessing, tuning in. How are they doing? Have they been making changes? They're acutely aware of that and, feel a little bit like they're under the microscope. And so that puts them back on their heels a little bit, or at least it can. So I think talk about that, identify. It has been a long time since we've seen you, and of course we want to get a sense of how you're doing. Maybe we should just ask you.
Yeah. Or it hasn't been that long, so it might be even easier to slip into some of those roles. But I mean, even if it has been a really long time, I just spent this past weekend with my mom, and we were staying in a hotel. It was a family wedding, and I forgot something in the hotel room. My mom was like, "Oh, let me go get that for you," and I was like, "Okay." And then as soon as she walked in, I was like, wait a second. Like, she didn't need to go in and do that. I'm a grown adult. I could do that. But just in that moment, we both just shifted right back into those old roles.
It's so easy for that to happen.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Other members and groups are talking about, some nervousness about conflicts with siblings that, are unresolved issues, and how do I best handle that? How will I best handle interacting with extended family? So, all these things are on their mind. They're not oblivious to any of it, but they may not be finding the words exactly to communicate that. So, part of you being in that adult ego state is encouraging and facilitating some of those conversations in a really sort of curious mind sort of way.
Yes.
You don't want to be the expert. And, you don't want to sort of think you have the conclusion figured out before you even had the conversation.
Dictate all of the information.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I do. And I'm usually wrong. So, I think, again, having that curious mind is a new way of interacting with them, or potentially. Maybe you've been doing it all along. But, these folks have been living in their own apartments for, some of them going on a year now, right? And they're not necessarily fully independent. We're not saying that. They're still very reliant on all of you. But they have been working to develop some new patterns and new ways of thinking and new ways of interacting. And our hope is that you can celebrate that with them.
Yeah.
So what are some other potential challenges coming home? There's issues around money, So a lot of times families go out to dinner, and obviously our members are not going to be in a position to say, let me pick up the tab for dinner. But they may be in a position to say, let me pay the tip. That's, again, maintaining that adult-adult thing. And as a parent, to honor that, because it's important for them to feel that they're contributing in an adult way.
Or for those of you who have drivers in your family, maybe it's a nice thing where they can drive you to dinner and you don't have to worry about the parking, or just having someone that can kind of be paying attention to the coming and going. That's a responsibility that a lot of parents carry for much of their child's life, and so that might be a small way in which they can contribute in their adult ego way to that particular outing.
Sure.
Yeah, letting them get themselves up in the morning. Maybe they're sleeping a little later than they should be, but allowing them to kind of have that independent adult moment of getting themselves up. And if time management becomes a challenge when their time is at home, then having that conversation around, how can we support you with this without kind of taking over. Another thing that I was thinking about is like splitting time with friends and family, right? And so making sure there's a conversation about that if their friends are nearby and they might want to do that. What days make the most sense, what times.
Yeah, and back to the point about letting them sleep in and get themselves up, balancing that with having a conversation in advance around, okay, so Wednesday morning we've got this thing to do at 10 a.m. Can you make it a priority to be up and ready to go for that? So that setting expectations
ahead of time.
Yeah, but you don't need to be rolling them out of bed anymore. What else tends to come up? You were talking about driving the car. So if you're preparing the meal for Thanksgiving and you need some more flour, just asking them to run to the store for you, and them being able to take on that responsibility in a helpful, empathetic sort of way.
Yep. Maybe helping with smaller meals, appetizers, or picking up after the meal, clearing the table, helping with dishes, all of those things. There's lots and lots and lots of ways for everybody in the family to contribute. It doesn't have to be this kind of black and white, like, oh, you're here for the first time, you make the Thanksgiving meal. Right. There are plenty of ways that they can contribute and be really helpful in creating a successful holiday together by breaking down those tasks a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think making sure there's a balance, right? Because y'all are their parents, so maybe you want to do their laundry for them, right? And that's totally okay, but allowing them to show up as an adult in another way. Maybe it's they clean the table and do dishes, or something to just kind of balance. Maybe they walk the dog. Just kind of balance that out. It's okay to slip into those ego states and to do something nice for your kid.
Right. And it does feel good to do things for our kids, right? But that issue of reciprocity, that this is a two-way street, and it's important for us to give back to our parents as well as receive from them. Right?
Yeah, and I think, do you have the visual aid that might be helpful?
We're very high tech today.
Yes, but I find this really helpful because, say, one side is y'all, and then one side is your emerging adults. Just noticing that, one, it can't be like an adult-child state. If somebody's in a child state, somebody else is in that parent ego state. It kind of pulls the other party into the other role. Same that way. So trying to maintain this adult to adult and looking at your interactions over the entire period of time, right? So that they balance out. So for most of the time, you're maintaining that adult to adult dynamic. Say you do the laundry for them, great. They might walk the dogs or do the dishes. And sometimes our young adults can act like parents and pull you into a child role. So just making sure you're kind of trying to find that balance over time, I feel like is what's really important.
Good point.
Yeah. And again, it's not always the emerging adult that sort of can initiate the regression. As parents, we can slip back into these old patterns too. And if it's a complementary transaction, like I was telling you, it's true. When I was 25, I moved back east from living out west. And I'd been living independently, cooking, maintaining my own apartment, all that sort of stuff. And within pretty short order, I was only home for a few months, but within short order, I stopped making my bed and my mom started making my bed. And, so that was a complementary relationship, I think. She might have felt different.
She might have a different opinion.
But, So it's really important to pay attention to, are there ways as parents that we're slipping back into some of this stuff too?
Mm-hmm.
Let's see, what else have we covered with them? I know what I wanted to bring up. Frequently around the holidays, we're serving alcohol at dinner, right? And it's part of the celebration, and we're not being teetotalers here by any means. But alcohol can contribute to increased regression in these roles. And we can get a little more fractious, we can get a little more dependent, we can get a little louder, all those sorts of things. So pay attention to that as well. And in the same way that we encourage our members to take space if they need to, just to kind of get regrouped a little bit, we encourage y'all to do the same thing.
Absolutely.
Sometimes we need to walk away from these things too.
Self-care is important for all members of the family.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's self-care in general, as parents. You've probably had some routines established since your emerging adults have moved away, which is great. We celebrate this. And we would encourage you to maintain those routines that you've established. If you get out for a walk every morning, keep doing that.
Yes.
Don't stop just because they're home. If you go for a run, whatever it is, take a yoga class, keep doing all of those things because that will help maintain these adult ego states.
Absolutely.
And a great way to respect your emerging adults' adult ego state is if they come home with some new routines and new values around things that are important to them in their day-to-day. Being able to respect that and make space for that, too, is going to be hugely helpful.
Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Any final thoughts?
So I think just with the way that I did with members and their setting intentions, I'd like to challenge y'all to think about your intentions and some ways that you can show up for your young adults and the rest of your family to help kind of maintain that adult-to-adult dynamic. Just have some things in the back of your mind. So if you feel yourself kind of slipping more into that parent role, you can think, okay, I said I was going to try to practice this. And, even if it's just, I think I had them list 3, right? So 3 things you focus on, that's great, and that's going to help the dynamics from shifting that far into regressive patterns.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Any other final thoughts from you?
No, that was perfect.
Okay.
Thanks, Jackie.
So on that note, we want to wish you all a happy Thanksgiving and celebrate having your family together. We'll be back again. I don't know if we'll be back before the holidays, but we'll be back soon.
Yes, we'll let you know.
Yeah, we'll let you know. So thank you for joining us, and thank you both for being a part of this.
Thanks, Andy.
Yeah, so good night. And
Happy
thanks again.
Thanksgiving.
Bye.